Hello, everybody. What's up?
Oh, shit. We're live now. I didn't even see the button go. What's up, everybody? It's the Vanguard meets the Radical Democracy show.
What's up, folks? Welcome to Either Or. Glad to have you here with us. Appreciate
Indeed.
you joining.
Obviously, if you're tuning in on the Vanguard, I'm Gavin, and that's Zach. Obviously, you know who we are. We are doing a bit of a cross, collaboration with our good friend Kamali over at the Radical Democracy Show. So again, if you're tuning in on the Vanguard, hit up the Radical Democracy Show sub over there. And obviously, likewise goes for fans of Democracy or Radical Democracy Show. But yeah, we're doing a book club episode today, a sequel to our last week's episode, which explored the first couple chapters of Cornel West's Democracy Matters. And this week we're getting into chapters 3 and 4. And this was definitely good timing because chapter 4 in particular really has a lot to do with the Israel-Palestine conflict. And it's interesting to see the way it was written about back in, I believe, 2005.
Well, 4 was when it was written, I think, but yeah.
Compared to now, when obviously there's a little bit of renewed understanding on this issue. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation to have. But generally, we're just really excited to be back here with some good comrades today. We're in good company. And, I was
just very quickly, so we don't do the same manufacturing of consent as the mainstream media. Not to, don't want to paint this as a conflict, which makes it sound very even-keeled in sort of congruous, and so it's really the Israeli occupation and apartheid over Palestinian people, and so just want to make sure that we don't do the same manufacturing of consent.
No, that's a good call. That's a good call. It's very easy to just slip into using the wording of the mainstream media when you're talking about an issue like that, but you're absolutely right. It's really not a conflict. It's an occupation.
Neo-colonialism in practice.
Exactly. This is settler colonialism. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess, I just want to say one more thing on the subject matter, which is that, it does seem one thing that has been nice to see, I guess, the one kind of silver lining of this, last week or so, of course, the horrific news coming out of Palestine is that it does seem to, from my vantage point, at least, that most people on the left have united in opposition to the Israeli actions against the people of Palestine. It seems like most people in this space or on the left in general that generally have a lot of disagreements with each other have agreed, this is the nature of the situation. Wrong. Yeah, exactly. Which should not be a high, bar. It's not like understanding or speaking accurately in accurate terms about the situation is, deserving of praise necessarily. But I do think it's a good thing, not a bad thing, that, there has been some progress made over the last 10, even 5 years, as more people have given, air to BDS, for example, and explained the concept and given more historical context about the occupation of Palestine, knowledge that was not as widely traded in earlier years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that in regards to, how it plays out in Democracy Matters, in Cornel West Democracy Matters, I think that it really does show you how, and I'm sure we'll get into this as we discuss chapter 4, but back when he was writing this book in 2004, he was doing the work of trying to push the progressive left in that direction. It's clear from what he's writing in the book that it was an acceptable progressive position to still back Israel even back then. And so there has been a radical shift, I would say, on the left in regards to this.
I think that's 100% spot on. One thing I did want to ask you about really quickly, Kamala, because we talked about not slipping into the mainstream kind of rhetoric, and this is I noticed that you used the term apartheid. A lot of people have gone so far as to use the term genocide and ethnic cleansing. I'm just wondering, where do you fall on that? And is there a reason you were using apartheid?
I think that those are all correct. And in fact, I was searching for the words that I wanted to say.
Sure,
it was on the fly. I think that ethnic cleansing is probably the best descriptor of what's going on there.
Because it seems to me like the goal is obvious. They want to remove and exterminate all of the Palestinian population from within the confines of what is Israel as Israel imagines it.
Absolutely, and this is I think that settler colonialism is a term that I believe describes that, but it doesn't necessarily invoke the same emotion that the term ethnic cleansing doesn't, in because they are certainly not precisely the same things. But I do, under settler colonialism, the goal is to rule over another people, as opposed to like when you expanding borders, expansion, sort of territorial expansion.
I see
when you're actually bringing people in and under to actually serve as citizens under your. This is certainly a ruling sector over another.
That being said, I do think, just from personal or anecdotal experience, that it is somewhat useful evoking South African apartheid to make a comparison, because it is a more recent example that people can look to. How was it successfully countered? The world had to come together to condemn this. It started off with, American presidents like Reagan supporting it. And then what happened to get us from point A to point B? And I think that, again, because it's an example for slightly more recent American history that some people might remember, not American history, but international history, that evoking that might be beneficial, just to help, paint a portrait of something similar that's going on. Well, it may not be technically apartheid. You're right. It's more of settler colonialism. I do think it is helpful to reference apartheid South Africa as a similar situation. Do you agree with that? Because obviously everyone at this point agrees that Mandela is not a terrorist, right? He's a hero.
Exactly. And to quote Mandela on this issue, he said that South Africa will not be free until Palestine is free. And so that is, we have to look at these issues as absolutely interconnected. And I saw someone else saying that, the Palestinians, they're not just fighting for the freedom of Palestinian people, but they're fighting for all of our freedom at this point, because this, what's going on there, we've seen similar situations play out in other places, across the sort of global South, and certainly fueled by American, U.S. capitalism. And so I absolutely agree that there is a ton of overlap between what was going on in South Africa. Of course, there is a difference in sort of the populations of those two places, in the amount, the sort of proportion of Black to, white South Africans. But I still think that there are an immense amount of consistencies between those two situations. And it's very, I think, important to draw on. I think that sadly, apartheid has, because of the way that the news cycle works nowadays, in just the constant sort of onslaught of information that we get, I think it's, even the term apartheid is sadly a little bit distant in people's memory, and that it unfortunately doesn't invoke the same kind of response that it did back when we were talking, back when Mandela was really sort of at the heights in the apartheid
when
situation.
Joe Biden was fearlessly risking his life and
getting arrested with Nelson Mandela
to free the people. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I love Biden,
Yeah. Obviously, I wanted to talk a little bit about the first chapter, the third chapter, which is the first chapter that we are getting to today, because I think that it also kind of really excellently captures another sentiment and another mood that is really relevant. And that's a sort of a defeatist feeling towards electoral politics, right? Obviously, this book is called Democracy Matters. Cornel West is very concerned with electoralism, and throughout the book, he talks about how we can, expand democracy, in other parts of the world, as well as the democracy that we have domestically. But one of the things that he writes at the beginning of this is that to many, our democratic system seems so broken that they have simply lost faith that their participation could really matter. The politics of self-interest and catering to narrow special interest is so dominant that so many ask themselves, why vote? This disaffection stems from the all too true reality of the corruption of our systems and the deeper psychic disillusionment and disappointment. The political discourse is so formulaic, so tailored into poll-driven, focus group-approved slogans that don't really say anything substantive or strike at the core of our lived experience, lack the authenticity of discourse, and the underlying lack of gravitas, essentially is numbing. And I think that's so true. And I think that's the experience that so many people are going through right now in this stage in America. So while we have obviously the horrors that are going on that the U.S. is definitely financially and militarily supporting in Israel, domestically, there is this numbness. There is this prevailing sense of apathy. It feels like amongst people who would consider themselves politically, on the left and activist voters, and just really people in general. When you look at how few people participated in our last presidential election, I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, we have it's routinely about 50 to 55% of the country that votes. And, you have some other countries where you get, 80+%, voter turnout.
I think, and it helps. Yeah. 30 or something.
Yeah. It was about 55%.
But that's in the presidential election, right? Not necessarily.
Yes, in the presidential election. Yes. In midterms, it's far less. Yeah, there is a steep drop off in
municipal elections. It's not even 30%. I don't think. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, exactly. So if a sign of a healthy democracy, if we were really measuring signs of a healthy democracy, I think that voter turnout would be one of the key metrics that we were basing that on. And so in many ways, there are many far healthier democracies than this supposed democracy that we live under. And to Zach's point there, in referencing that quote about the current sort of this seeping nihilism and cynicism towards the electoral politics, I think that it is something that we just have to realize is a symptom of the mainstream media that we have, the corporate, this corporate dominated media, the two-party duopoly, where we essentially have two capitalist corporatist parties that are just two sides of the same coin. And the debate has been narrowed so much on, that people see that the things that they care about are not being discussed on CNN and on MSNBC. They'll spend months and years talking about Russiagate and these sort of, fringe, things that don't impact people's day-to-day lives. And that just pushes people further and further away. And it's something that we really got to reckon with, because this is what I've seen as a Black person growing up in poor Black and brown communities for most of my life in the sort of inner city, as they say, in Boston. It was most of the people that I interacted with were simply detached from politics. They were cynical about it. They felt that there's nothing there for them. And so why should I participate when I every time we've done it, we try over and over again. And so I think that what's happening right now in the Democratic Party, a lot of Black folks have already sort of been feeling that and had already experienced that. They're sort of the canary in the coal mine for electoral politics. And I think that more people are just sort of catching up to it now to realize that these people don't represent us. And one of the reasons that I'm such a strong and staunch advocate for workplace democracy is because I think that that's the step that we have to take if we want to teach people and reignite that flame of democracy. I think that you have to give it to people in a substantive way. And when democracy becomes this thing that you participate in once every 4 years, 2 to 4 years, and it's pretty much only about voting, casting a vote to pick from a predetermined set of people,
and not even bargain every time.
Exactly. We're not even talking about like other countries, Australia, plenty of other UK have referendums, have more direct democracy involved in their democratic process. We have nothing of the sorts, not to mention our, the two-party system, what it does versus a parliamentary system, for people lacking representation. But when what we know as democracy becomes so abstracted away from us and becomes so distant and proximal to our daily lives, it ends up becoming something where you don't even you no longer feel the need to fight for it. You don't, this thing becomes less important. You can disengage from it. And I think that if we gave people democracy in the workplace where they're spending the majority of 8 hours a day every day of their lives, then they would start to, wake up to the idea of and want to and feel the need to engage more in the political democracy if we gave people economic democracy.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think that, it's not necessarily so much that people have disengaged from democracy. It's that democracy is disengaged from the will of the people, or rather our quote unquote democratically elected representatives, again, quote unquote, have disengaged from the actual will of the voters. You're so correct, Kamali, that how many streets or communities in this country have remained just as dilapidated, regardless of who's in power, regardless of 8 years of Obama or 8 years of Clinton or 8 years of Bush. These communities remain the same. Same goes with all of the communities across the country that had all the jobs outsourced, all the industry outsourced, thanks to these trade deals. It doesn't matter who's in charge; those jobs aren't coming back. If you live in some decimated steel town in Pennsylvania or whatever, and you're now living on unemployment and addicted to opiates and some shit, like, a Democrat's being in office, it hasn't changed that. It certainly hasn't up until now. We'll see what happens, but it's not like either party has really represented the answer to these problems. And if anything, both parties have been, aiding and abetting the problem itself. The outsourcing deals, the quote unquote globalization, which has led to some of this stuff, that, corporate capitalism that demands the policy concessions that the legislators willingly give them. So it's so true that, it's not necessarily that people don't want to vote or they don't want to be represented democratically. It's that, try as they might, there's no democratic representation to be found. There is no one there to enact their will. I mean, over half the country wants legal cannabis. Why, if we live in a representative democracy, then we would have it by now. One thing after another. The people's voice is not being heard. So, what's even the point of participating?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that West articulates that again when he said, he talks about how the people are longing for a politics that's not about, winning, but rather about the benefit of your personal life improvement, which is something that he talks about has been completely eroded from the American political system. The fact that people don't have any expectation that the person that they're voting for Senate or House of Representatives or even president is going to change their lives in any kind of substantial way. People might think that it kind of feels like a social win, like a kind of like the same kind of feeling you get when your favorite football team maybe even wins a championship if you win a presidential race, but it's all fleeting, right? It's all just fabricated. Your life doesn't meaningfully get impacted by whoever is being occupied in office. If you live abroad, it certainly can. But really, for the most part in America, our lives are relatively unswayed by our presidential or any of our elected politics. And so that, how can we be surprised that there's so much apathy and lack of participation? It seems like that's by design.
Absolutely. And West Point that politics is and always has been about a certain, there's certain individuality to it where you are concerned. Everyone is concerned about how is this going to improve my situation? And so we have to recognize politics, even as this collective, when we talk about it collectively, still recognizing that there is, and we should still embrace the idea of individuality and people's, and not necessarily individualism, the idea that everybody should sort of wall off and be their own separate entity entirely. But the idea of, people being able to express their individuality, where some folks have this idea that communists all want to make everybody the same and everybody's totally equal, totally the same. But it's really that true socialists have a concept of individuality that embraces that highlights that, champions that, and still says and recognizes that people are voting for out of self-interest. And so when that happens, we have to go and meet the people where they are and actually do something that engages their self-interest. Okay, how is this going to improve my life? It's a very easy way to improve the lives of working people. For instance, when you raise the wages, right? Like, that's a very simple, straightforward way. Most Americans are a part of the employee class, not the employer class, and they're waged employees. And if we raise their wages, then that is a material benefit to people's lives. But we just saw an opportunity, fly in people's faces to increase a minimum wage to just, less than acceptable levels of $15 an hour, and it completely failed. And it was even with the after we've done all this fighting and this work to get folks like AOC and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Jamal Bowman elected, and Ro Khanna and all these people elected into Congress, we still see they are ultimately co-opted into the same sort of Democratic Party machine that grinds people down and just spits them out as the same sort of.
You're telling me that Ro Khanna is not going to bring the revolution?
Oh man, Ro over there, Are you sure, bro? And yet she persisted. Ro Khanna, big Elizabeth Warren fan.
Also, I just wanted to mention real quick before you butt in, Zach, that it's so funny, that meme about how communism is going to make everyone look the same or whatever the fuck. Meanwhile, we have capitalist fashion trends that literally dictate what it is acceptable or unacceptable to dress or look like in our society, which does create a society of people that all look exactly the fucking same.
Absolutely. And maybe we can pull up that third quote that I had in there, because I think it relates to Zach's point about the sort of increasing like apathy. And this is no, it should be I think it's the third one. Yeah, the one off the bottom. Yeah. So this is Cornel West in chapter 3. He's talking about James Baldwin, you know, the prophetic Black author and figure activist. If you haven't watched James Baldwin debate William Buckley at Cambridge University, you are. I know it's an incredible thing. Everyone should experience it. It's amazing. But this is him talking about James Baldwin, who was a democratically minded individual, somebody that truly believed in democracy and in the power of democracy. And this is him describing sort of even James Baldwin becoming, sort of apathetic and nihilistic about democracy in some ways because of what actually the outcomes that were resulting. So this is a quote. He says, "The murders of Medgar, Malcolm, and Martin were devastating to Baldwin. Vietnam was another wound. The U.S. supported fascist coup in Chile, another bruise. The invisibility of Palestinian suffering in U.S. foreign policy, another scar. Even democratic intellectuals can bear only so much. The time was so out of joint, cursed with spite, that he began to wonder whether it could ever be set right. Yet he labored on, comforted more and more by the blues and jazz he cherished and the family he cared so much for. He had made a free artist of himself, had dug as deep as the soul could go, and was as sincere as the Holy Ghost. Yet he wondered, does America have what it takes to conquer racism and dismantle empire? If so, when will it muster the vision and courage to do so? If not, what are we to do?" At his funeral in New York City in 1987, Baldwin himself was heard singing Thomas Dorsey's classic and Martin Luther King's favorite song, "Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn." And this is showing the sort of, even, folks like this that have, so deeply rooted in this sort of democratic tradition in America and really fighting to expand democracy in America, because what Baldwin believed was that until Black people, and he just used as an example of one people. I mean, there's in every cross section and intersection of people need to have democracy, but he used race to highlight the absence of a true democracy in America, because if everyone doesn't have access to that, then it's not a true democracy. There's some set of people that are ruling over others in an unfair, unaccountable way. And so I think that this shows that even the best of us can really be sort of beat down by the constant, barrage of failures of the sort of, and really these are successes to the democratic and conservative sort of corporate elite. It's successes to them, but what feels like failures to us.
This does feed into one of the other points that Wes makes in this chapter 3 that I wanted to discuss with you guys. I didn't pull a quote for it because I've been listening to the audiobook, which I cannot recommend more, because I just love listening to Cornel West talk about this and really drive it home. And he really gets passionate when he's reading his own work, and it's excellent. But he mentions the populist movement, and he talks about the farmers and the original meaning of populism, and how the aspirations of populism in the 1890s and was a lot greater than what it ended up becoming. And he talks about how there were also obvious pitfalls, and how there was a difficulty getting Black farmers alliances to be able to get the same rights as the white farmers alliances that were occurring at the time. But he talks about how it was an effective blueprint, right? And in the same way that we have hurdles over democracy that we've had to get over throughout our history to make our society more diverse, or not diverse, but rather more democratic, because through its diversity, we've had to change things. But the same thing with populism, right? You said it's not democracy if it's not accessible to everybody. The same thing, it's not populism if it doesn't apply to anything. But I'm always excited when I see little bits of populist history, because it seems like populism, even still, despite Thomas Frank's best efforts, has been demonized.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, he drew on, populism, and we referenced it in our previous statement when he has drawn on the sort of populist movement as examples of movements that were at the very least, like sort of reformist movements that helped, if not, because they probably don't meet his definition of revolutionary really, but they were critical to the sort of development of our revolutionary, movements that we hold now. And so we have to learn lessons from those movements in the way that they will be, demonized like populism in the same way they demonized, through the Red Scare, socialism in this country, to the point that it was something that a whole generation of people just ultimately, were afraid of and couldn't even talk about. We have to sort of resist that and have the courage to resist that and be willing to take the, whatever heat comes from sort of, or the lack of, we're not going to get onto MSNBC or CNN talking about populist ideas or socialist ideas and ideals really, but we can, we have to still do the work that we're doing.
You just have to take the eyeballs that are watching MSNBC and force them to watch you instead, which I think if we've had any success so far, it's been, I think that there's a staggering amount of people who are abandoning MSNBC style news right now. So it should be a real right time for people to make this conversion. Unfortunately, we also see people just tuning out of news media in general all at once.
Yeah, especially after the Russiagate story fell apart, it really did seem like MSNBC took a hit, and obviously after Trump as well. But I mean, after the way they hyped up the Mueller report and the Russia story, and after it just totally imploded, I really can't imagine anyone, seriously watching it anymore as if it's anything other than complete, corporate funded infotainment. Yeah, like just garbage. I mean, again, they hyped up that story as if it was going to take down Trump for years. Like, trust me, like family members were like, "Oh, Mueller's going to take him down." Like, oh shit. I was like, it ain't going to happen, bro.
Yeah, I know. But I guess this is a good way, unless you had another quote that you wanted to read from chapter 3, I think we can segue on to, obviously what we've been itching to talk about this entire time, which is West's thoughts on Israel-Palestine. And one thing that Gavin, you mentioned this the last time we did this podcast, but it was even driven home way more during this chapter, is the fact that West does definitely play the two sides-isms a lot in this book. And he is extremely sensitive in his wording about everything. And every time he says anything remotely critical about Israel, he immediately follows it off by calling, like Hamas terrorists out and being like, the Hamas suicide bombers. I think he definitely is speaking as a product of his time. And I pulled a clip that we can watch that shows him a lot now speaking a lot more potently about the matter. But at the time, he was very reserved. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, for one, before you get into Kamal, I just wanted to say one more time, and I reiterated this on the stream the last time too, but it really does seem in my eyes, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this too, Kamal, if you think there's a direct correlation here. But to me, it does seem like the fact that Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib have been outspoken advocates for BDS, which previously was not even well known, let alone popularized or explained as a concept. It does seem like they've created a space for a normalization of this conversation to be had in terms that are accurate. Would you agree? Because it seems like even 5 years ago, people weren't talking about this situation as they are in the past week.
Yeah, I don't know to what extent I would credit, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, not because they're not great on this issue and speaking some real truth to power on this issue, but because you have the constant, demonization of these Muslim, Muslim American, Palestinian American, figures like Ilhan Omar being Muslim American, Rashida Tlaib being a Palestinian American, and I think that because of the sort of one, you had even people, because not only did the conservatives in the right wing demonize these folks, but very early on, if you remember, the Democratic Party participated as well in, coming down very hard on Ilhan Omar when she criticized AIPAC, and you'll see even in this book,
all about the Benjamins,
Cornel West, exactly, when she said it's all about the Benjamins, and it was, I understand we have to walk this very careful line, and we have to be we should be very sensitive. We absolutely should be. We shouldn't fall into tropes, and we want to avoid that at all costs. But that does not mean that any, institution or organization, especially one, responsible for aiding and abetting a genocide, cannot be beyond reproach and cannot be beyond criticism. And nothing that she said was factually incorrect. And she definitely pointed to that issue of AIPAC. And in fact, I think it's right around that part of the book that is one of the points where Cornel West is very careful to make sure that he says, he has to tie in the bit. And this is what a very careful scholar like Cornel West is very capable of doing, is making sure that because he's so aware of all of the tropes, he can also combat that in his language and say, listen, I know this is typically used as sort of in an anti-Semitic way, but this is not the intention.
Do you remember that clip of Cornel West? And it's a little old. It was from like 2016 when they were talking about the DNC platform. And he like famously asks the guy to his face if he's gonna, make BDS a part of the Democratic Party platform in 2016. You guys remember that?
No, I don't remember the clip.
Fuck, I should have pulled it then. But either way, he does this expert job because he's talking to a dude that is, I believe, Jewish. And he's, talking about how much he like loves and respects him. And he's like, you and I come from the same background. He was like, I'm from the Christian church. You're from the Jewish synagogue. And he was like, starts talking about how they both have this, fundamental commitment to truth and justice and all these things. And he was like, and that's why I'm sure as I respect you so much and you respect me so much, that you will stand firmly in opposition to the mistreatment of the Palestinian people based off of this long lineage of courage and compassion that have been represented by all of this. And then he just kind of like leaves the guy speechless there. And I feel like that is kind of the power of somebody like Cornel West when they do that, because they just make it so impossible to disagree with them in their phrasing. And they tell you that they love you like 30 times, so you can't possibly portray them as a villain. And there, you know what I mean? I do think so. A lot of times I want to roll my eyes and get angry at people who play who use that kind of rhetoric. But I know that Cornel West is so uncompromising in his goals towards this that I feel like he's probably playing chess, not checkers. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think
although I do just genuinely think, though, the fact that there have been more prominent Muslim and Palestinian voices to explain this to even people like Cornel West, I feel like it has it created an even larger understanding about this issue and an even larger willingness to talk about it in explicit and accurate terms, as we've seen again over this last week or so, as people have used explicit and accurate terms to describe this, where even Cornel West in 2005 was really, let's be honest, quite often shying away from the reality, or at least putting kids' gloves on to speak about it, where I don't think that happens as much now. But did you agree with that?
Yeah, one of the notes that I jotted down on this, the first note that I jotted down about this was like about Dr. West equivocating on Israel-Palestinian violence, and like, specifically him mentioning like the Hamas's suicide bombers. Mm-hmm, right. And I think that I was watching a clip of Michael Brooks. Actually, it was from obviously before,
the one that like went viral about him talking about this.
Yeah, I think Halsey like retweeted it or something, and it's it's in a clip that I use a bunch of clips from that Michael Brooks speech. I forget where he was. He was talking at a school right before the pandemic lockdown. And
Michael Brooks was Jewish, wasn't he?
Yeah. Well, he at least came from a Jewish background. I don't know if he was, if he actively practiced Judaism. Yeah, but in that clip, he says he doesn't.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
His exact wording is like, I come from a Jewish background, and so he is. His family is Jewish. He comes from a Jewish background, and what he says in that clip is that it's precisely his Jewish values that teach him that apartheid and this sort of settler-colonialism, ethnic cleansing, and apartheid are wrong, and it is from those values that he's able to do that, and it comes out of those Jewish values. And I do think that there is a strong this vocal segment of the sort of progressive secular progressive left Jewish community that has been speaking out about this, which I think them lending their voice to it, because Palestinians are so diminished in our, in American society. I think that having those voices has been significant. And I also think that the advent of the internet, just the popularizing of the internet and the way that we're able to see more than we ever did before. I think that we can break through the mainstream media in a way that we weren't able to before. And so I on the issue of BDS and Palestine, I know that Cornel West back in 2016, I believe he said that even back then he felt that Bernie wasn't strong enough on those
he
movements.
did. Yeah, he said that in the clip also that he's like, I love my brother Bernie, but
yeah, exactly. Like he's like, this is one of the issues that he had to really push back on him. I do agree, Gavin. I think that as far as there's a certain set on the left that I think that Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar's support, and even to some degree, I think that AOC I think that she has done decent. At least she criticized Andrew Yang, and then she came back and she criticized Biden, which I thought was I surprised me a little bit. I think it's because she saw an opportunity, though. When the pressure wasn't there for AOC to do it, it was the who and the what and the how, and then what I mean. She's just seeing now, oh God, I have to take this position. But anyway, and certainly it might be that because she's come out weak on this in the past. There was that famous clip when she was on some right wingers. This white woman had her on interviewing her, and the clip blew up. I remember folks like David Pakman, shitting on her over it, and she essentially she tried to speak on the issue of Israel Palestine, and then she kind of said at one point in the interview, she's like, I'm not overly informed on this issue, and so I can't speak to it too much. And they kind of used it. Fox News ran it and said, look at her, she's an idiot, she's talking about things she doesn't know about. And ever since that, I noticed her really back away from the issue.
I actually do remember that. She was talking about basically the settler occupation. They were like, settlements? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
She was like, well, I'm pretty sure that's what's happening. Like, that's what I've heard. And they were like, are you sure? And she was like, oh, sorry.
That's when you have to be like, settler occupations.
Literally, are you not aware of what's going on? Like, have you not done your research?
A journalist. Yeah,
exactly. That was literally what made me stop watching David Pakman, was when he covered that, and the way that he covered it was as in the same way that the right wing did it, essentially to be like, oh, she's just an idiot that doesn't know what she's talking about, instead of making the point that no, actually she was right, and sure, she's not as informed. But then I would want, and this is the part where it's like, why we need more Black leftists out here talking about this shit, because it's like to help people recognize that if you're a Black, brown person in America, poor person in America, like if you're poor, if you're Black, if you're brown, I understand why those people may not be fully informed on every issue that is like international affairs and things like that, because you're just trying to survive every day. Like, you're just trying to scrape by, and we don't have conversations about like Palestine and Israel around the dinner table, or like politics in general. And a lot of civics isn't huge in a lot of Black communities because systemic reasons that
most white people aren't having those conversations.
Exactly. Like
white people, you're giving the white people way too much credit.
But even in general about politics, and so I can understand her being less informed about it. But you gotta, as somebody that once you're elected and you're an elected official, you definitely have a duty now to become informed on these topics when these are so critical, especially when
you get 174 racks for it.
Exactly. And what happens in Israel is it shouldn't have to be for selfish reasons that we care about it. But there is a selfish reason. If you're a Black person in America, or if you're a poor person in America, there is a selfish reason to care about this, brown person, whatever. And that's because Israel's defense forces and their military and their police are responsible for a lot of the training of, they train them in techniques on how to sort of control protesters, which is like how
they're also forcing you to fucking pay for it.
Absolutely. I mean, Israel gets literally half of all foreign aid either goes to Israel or, goes to a group associated with Israel. It's Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. And about half of all that money flows in through half of all of our foreign aid flows into them. But with AOC on this, I think that we have to acknowledge that she, criticisms of AOC abound from me, of course, but on this issue, I think that because of her popularity and the fact that we just have to reckon with the fact that she is a popular politician.
She's extremely popular.
So when somebody like her talks about this stuff, and again, and Ilhan Omar, I just think recently, when she's talking about this now, I think that it stands to move.
No, I agree with that, but I think that that's only because of the space that's been created by our fellow squad members, Rashida and Ilhan.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Oh, no, without a doubt. I don't think that if it weren't for that space being created for her, I don't think without a doubt.
I was making. Yeah.
Yes. So
well,
totally
one thing to jump in here, just to keep the ball rolling, Kamali, did you have any quotes from the great Dr. West on Israel Palestine to read?
Yep. So the first one, let's do the middle, the second one actually. So let me just. All right. So this is from this page 123. This is in chapter 4, and Cornel West, I quote, "Is in short, those in the powerful Jewish lobby, though far from monolithic and certainly not an almighty cabal of Zionists who rule the United States or the world in the vicious language of zealous anti-Semitism, are far to the right of most American Jews and are often contemptuous of prophetic Jewish voices. In fact, their preoccupation with Israel's security at the expense of the Palestinian cry for justice has not only produced little security for Israel, but also led many misinformed Jews down an imperial path that suffocates their own prophetic heritage." And I think that this was a really beautiful thing that Cornel West is doing, because what he's invoking is, that same sort of what Michael Brooks was talking about, and saying that it's through the very definition of your Jewish values themselves in the Jewish heritage that you should be condemning the actions of Israel in what they're doing, in the violence that they're committing against the Palestinians.
There's a great hour and a half or so, hour long episode that Katie Halper did with Norman Finkelstein, and obviously if people aren't familiar with Norman Finkelstein, he's another great voice on this matter, and he also comes from a Jewish background. And there was a clip that was going around of him basically just like there was a crying college student basically implying that he was like being anti-Semitic or something like that, and he basically says that he hates to bring this up, but both of his parents lost their entire fucking families to the Holocaust. His dad lost every single member of his family in Auschwitz. His mom also was in a Holocaust and was the only survivor. And he, goes on this rampage, and he says that not rampage, it was justified. I'm just saying it was a speech. And he talks about how, that it is all of that tradition. It is standing on those monolithic shoulders that he has to fight for the justice and equality of all people. And so I 100%, I think it's complete. There's no reason to conflate being a pro-Palestinian with being anti-Jewish, because so many of the most powerful, prescient Jewish voices are obviously making this clear case as well. So, but I just think it's, and obviously David Graeber wrote the piece that false charges of anti-Semitism are actually more dangerous to him, being a Jewish man, than or made him feel like it was more than the actual anti-Semites at times. So I think that Cornel West does do an amazing job at evoking the rich heritage that a lot of people feel connected to. I'm a totally secular guy, so I don't really have a history like that I feel connected to, but I understand that's a very powerful motivator for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And generally, I just think it is a little bit crazy. We talked about this earlier in the last live stream, but the very concept of Israel pretty much it is an ethno state if you think about it, which is a very weird response to the plight of the Jewish people. That's to think that would be the solution to the problem. To me, is very. I don't know. Right words
what? And that just makes me. What you just said just makes me think. Those same set of people, like, because there is absolutely a crossover here. Like, because a lot of these people are sort of, fundamentalists, like religious, Christians, Zionist Christians, conservative, right-wing conservatives. Imagine, do those people believe that, say, indigenous people have a right to, come back and, just start, showing up, knocking on their doors, armed with guns, and telling them, sorry, I got rights to this land. This was my people's, my ancestors belonged here.
Get the fuck out of Indiana, Mike Pence.
Exactly. Do you support that? Do you support the idea of it's like they could never, exactly. Like I certainly more so do. But these are the same people that would absolutely, if you just run that little, thought experiment with them to say to just reverse roles and put yourself in that role. Like do they support something like that? Do they really believe that having sort of a birthright to a place entitles you to
Well,
violently
yeah.
oppress the people that are existing there, because then, you know,
I mean, let's be honest, that might be
humans are
part
gonna
of
come
the
from roost, yeah.
that might be part of the reticence on the, you know, American media, American culture to accept this for what it is, because that would, you know, force us to look in the mirror and think about our own country and the land that we're occupying and the peoples whose culture and lives have been eradicated as a result of our settling. So, you know, it's inextricably linked.
Yeah.
yes.
Well, if we did have a moment here, we don't have to play this whole clip, but I did want to give some of people a chance to watch and look and hear Cornel West on a more recent clip where he was on C-SPAN of all things. And I just found this. I think it was just like a random YouTuber. Shout out to whoever you are that clipped this off C-SPAN and put it up, because it was essentially a very recent recording of Cornel West making a full-throated defense of BDS and you know, talking about the need for justice for Palestine.
Yes, sir. Pleasure. Thank you so very much. Let me first say I'm very blessed and honored to be here. I want to salute my dear brother Harlan, for he has created a historically unprecedented salute to the moral dimension of the U.S. Republic. And why is that important? It's important precisely because of the epigraph of David Ben-Gurion, was first Prime Minister, State of Israel, March 1949 to June 1963. He said, the state of Israel proves itself not by its material wealth, not by its military might or its technical achievement, but by its moral character and human values. One of the great contributions that we have seen when our precious Jewish brothers and sisters dealing with indescribable evil generated by Hitler and others jumped out of the burning buildings of Europe and landed in the Middle East, where there were both Jews and Arabs. Some of those Arabs later called themselves Palestinians. And the question would be, would they go with Albert Einstein and Judah Magnus and Ahat Kaham and say, let us coexist? Or would they go with Jabotinsky and others saying, let us dominate? Very much like the founding of the United States and Canada and New Zealand and Australia, all of them with democratic visions, but also settler societies concerned with expanding and ending up dominating and subordinating people who were already there. So it is with this very, very fragile and precious experiment called the State of Israel. So that on the one hand, how do we avoid any ugly anti-Jewish prejudice, contempt, hatred, and at the same time, how do we stay in contact with the humanity of our Arab brothers and sisters? My question to you is, do we really believe that our response to the occupation and colonization that the BDS movement is concerned about, if it were a Palestinian occupation of our precious Jewish brothers and sisters, would we have the same response as opposed to the Israeli occupation of Palestinian brothers and sisters? What I love about this place is not just the words of Thucydides and Marcus Aurelius and Thomas Jefferson, but I saw a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. on the wall that Brother Harlan put there. And his concern is what? That a Palestinian baby has precisely the same significance and value as an Israeli baby. Just like a white baby, a brown baby, a yellow baby, whatever. No matter what national identity, no matter what sexual orientation, no matter what skin pigmentation. The moral and the spiritual challenge. My argument is that BDS, in no way perfect, having its own internal tensions, variety of different voices. The reason why I joined that movement is not because I don't have criticisms of the movement. Of course I do, and my dear brother Omar knows that. He's the founder of the movement. He lives in Ramallah. But it is the last nonviolent effort to try to ensure that the moral character and and the human values of a settler colonial enterprise that has involved itself in expansion, annexation, and leading toward, in the language of our dear brother Jimmy Carter, a full-fledged apartheid, not because Israel is in any way to be compared with the South African apartheid regime in all of its forms. Those Palestinians inside of Israel, much less apartheid. But those precious brothers and sisters in the West Bank and Gaza, Bishop Tutu says it's worse than apartheid. That's a moral issue. Brother Allen and I, who go back many years, he's kind enough to invite me to lecture in his class on the scriptural sources of law. We had some good times together at Harvard Law. We shall continue to have good times, even though we've got deep disagreements on this issue. That's precisely what this temple of learning is all about, based on Brother Harlan's vision.
Is that a good place to pause?
Yeah, I was just going to go ahead and say that we can dive back in there because he covered most of the main points. He gets a lot more like ramped up in the second half of it, but I feel like everybody got the sense of what he was trying to do and just what Cornel West does so masterfully. So for anybody who didn't catch that at the end, that dude viciously disagrees with Cornel West, and he's breaking the ice by being like, I love my dear brother. I've had plenty of great, tremendous times with this man. I'm sure we're going to have tremendous times in the future because I have so much love for you in my heart. Because again, it's going to make that guy impossible for him to go up there and be like, this man is a villain. He wants to support all these right? That is the beauty and masterclass of Cornel West, and I just wanted everybody to witness it.
Yeah.
Literally, whoever Cornel is talking to, he does that with. It's crazy. Like I even remember he was like called Trump, like Brother Trump and stuff. I'd be like, I don't know if I'd go that far, but you really do view us all as like the human race, and that is pretty dope.
I remember one guy on Fox News was like, it was another black dude, and he was like, I'm not your fucking brother. And Cornel West,
that's the first time I've ever seen Cornel West get
do you remember that clip?
In my life. When you can incite like anger out of Cornel West, you are beyond the pale. It's this right-wing Republican black guy who they get on, Fox News to like, say everything anti-black. How Fox News does. They get a woman to say everything misogynist. You know how they do. So they got this guy on, and he's just like, Cornel West is trying to be civil with them, and this I think was right in the wake of like, I think he had just come from the George Floyd funeral or wake, and so he just was not having it, and the dude was trying to tout the same sort of a right wing BS, and try to tell Cornel West,
check that out.
He was like, you do not get to decide who is my brother. I am a Christian man. I am a God son. I will decide who is my family. I love everybody.
Like he was angry, but still talking about love. Like he's like angrily telling him how much he's still gonna love him, even if he don't want it. He's still gonna take it. He's just like, I love Cornel West.
Love supreme, as Cornel West would say.
Yes, that Coltrane. Yeah, John Coltrane. No, for sure. That's in like to draw the ire of Cornel West. You really got to be
I could have never forgive myself.
Yeah, no, and I think it's wonderful. What he does is really, it's a smart. I don't know if he's doing it as a technique or tactic or whatever. If that's just how genuinely loving and good he is. Like he's a far better human being than I am. That's for certain. And like his ability to see the humanity in everyone. I actually meant to grab a quote, but I don't think I have the quote where he talks about how, the ability for, I believe, he was referencing James Baldwin, and he was talking about James Baldwin's ability to still, never lose sight of the humanity, and dignity of like black people, but also to never lose sight of the humanity, of white folks that were oppressing and racist, overtly racist at the time. Mm-hmm. But he never lost sight of that in wanting to try to build a better democracy that included all of these people. And so we have to, I just think that is a tremendous, ability that he has to be able to go anywhere essentially. And that's why you still see Cornel West getting invited onto mainstream media and can still promote these ideas in a way that most of us, let's just be real, they're never, bringing on, any of us or a Jimmy Dore, like you're going to call the cuck on national television. You're not bringing Jimmy Dore on, like you're scared, like it's like, But Cornel West will say all, you know, can really. He went on Joe Rogan, and the way that he, you know, cut
he actually handled that Joe Rogan. I thought about pulling the Joe Rogan clip, but then I thought too many people had seen it, so I wanted to do this one. But he does do a really excellent job talking about Israel-Palestine in that clip with Joe Rogan, and what I imagine is providing one of the first nuanced cases for Palestinian liberation to the wide swath of Joe Rogan's audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. He sort of disarms you in a way with this rhetoric, and it's his kindness, his love, and he's genuine and sincere when he will compliment somebody. It's like he studies people before he goes and like meets with anyone. Like if you ever watch a speech of Cornel West, before he starts a speech, he goes through like everybody in the room that he knows, and he says something nice about them. And he's like, where's sister, you know, Marion? Oh, stand up and give a round of applause. And he knows about every, you know, he'll talk about the history and their kids and their
tradition, though. You know what I mean? The Black Baptist church is really like that. It's very family and communal and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like he really represents all the best elements of Christianity. And I feel like a lot of the best elements of Christianity are, you know, embodied in the Black church, because it was all of the aspirational, the hope, the keeping going, the helping each other, all the shit that, I mean, obviously came from slavery.
Yeah.
Right.
And honestly, yeah, and then when it comes to an issue like Israel-Palestine, which is so prickly and remains so misunderstood by the general population, like that is really the apex way to communicate with other human beings. Because, like, let's be honest, even people, I still encounter people on the left that don't really know what's going on in Israel-Palestine. Like, your average person, the problem is ignorance. You know what I'm saying? Like, they just don't understand. I think if your average person, if they did understand, then they would come to the right conclusion, because most people don't agree with occupation, genocide, ethnic cleansing, etc.
Yeah.
The problem is that most people just don't understand. There's so much stuff going on around the world. They're busy. They're, you know, depressed by the news. They don't want to, you know, they don't want to educate themselves. So it really is beneficial when someone like Cornel West, you know, maybe they haven't heard of the situation before. He comes at it from that place of, you know, he's going to open you up first and then explain it to you. You know, any preconceived notions aside, it's going to be it's going to be effective communication. So I just think that there's so much to learn from that. Obviously, on the left, you know, we are people that are paying a lot of attention to stuff, and we come at these issues with some, you know, really opinionated. We have the you know, a rant we want to go on, and we want to speak truth to power. But some people that aren't also in that situation, you know, that's not really the appropriate approach in which to communicate with them. You know, just sit them down and be like, genocide, and we got to fucking fight, and like all that. You know, they're gonna be like, Jesus Christ, guys, like, you know what I'm saying? Cornel West really, you know, we can all learn a lot from communication, just as far as addressing people that may not already be on the same page as us.
Yeah. He talked about that early in the book about, you know, still maintaining a level of civility. And it's not this like fake civility politics that he's doing where it's like all about just decorum and all that. He's like, no, you know, that civility means also having civility in the sense of recognizing the humanity of a Palestinian life and in these Palestinian people and fighting for that. But I lost my.
It's the same Black Lives Matter head fake, right? It's the same way that making the right wing talking point that like, oh, all lives matter. It's like, yeah, no fucking shit, asshole. But those aren't the people that we're talking about right now. You know what I mean? It's like, obviously, okay, we don't even have to fucking say that. Like, move on and accept the point that's being made here. But did you want to pull up that last quote that you had about from Wes so we can chat about it before we hop off?
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, this should be the first one.
Yeah. So this is another quote from the fourth chapter there. Cornel West says, "The tragic irony is that the deep faith of American and Israeli Jews in the American empire is itself idolatrous and dangerous. It is idolatrous because it makes the U.S. helicopter gunships that patrol the Palestinian West Bank and the U.S.-supported wall that separates Palestinians from Israel the dominant imperial symbols of an Israel founded in the name of the Israelite prophets. It is dangerous because it views America as the Jewish promised land, bereft of its own deep anti-Semitic impulses. The truth is that just as the American empire chose to favor Israel for political and geostrategic reasons, it can abandon Israel for the same reasons. And if an oil-rich Arab country could do imperial America's dirty work better than Israel at a lower cost and with less controversy, Israel might well be sold down the river. And I think that this was just an important point that he's making to try to show that this is really, it's America's not doing this because of, because they necessarily care so much about Israel. It's really about it's geopolitical strategy, really, and it's a way they have an ally in the region, and they would like to maintain that that power center there. And in with this, it's a very feeble, sort of fickle support, where that support can disappear at any time.
Once we get off if we were ever to actually get on a green energy, we would no longer have the need for oil, and then Israel is going to be fucked. So yeah, that's just a reality, guys. Like, I'm telling you, the United States, I mean, just as we were before all of the Shah shit in Iran happened, we were not we were not funding Israel to the degree that we were. We could go back to not funding Israel the way that we were, and then the whole geopolitical system changes. I don't think people understand to what degree the United States is responsible for what's going on in Israel, and the fact that Israel is able to operate as a country with the military that it is.
We are responsible.
It's 100%. That's what I mean. We are fully responsible for that. So without
us, it at any point,
exactly. And then none of this is even in conversation, which is why it's such a priority, and it should remain a priority for U.S. leftists to continue to call this out. Like, so many people are like, "Why are you talking about this all the time?" Like, this is why. We are responsible for this. Our taxpayers, our tax dollars, rather. We are taxpayers, all of us, whether you like it or not. If you buy shit at the store, you're a taxpayer. We are funding this with our fucking money, and it is our responsibility to speak out against it when our corrupt fucking government will not do it. And I think Cornel West just put this so articulately, and I'm so happy that our book club, which was completely randomly scheduled, fell at what I feel was in a really appropriate time, because I hope that this becomes a resource for people who are new to the left and do have questions about this. Obviously, my whole shtick on the Vanguard is that I'm the rant guy, but I do think it is important to break these things down and talk about them in a slower fucking way. And obviously somebody like Cornel West does that so impeccably.
And even though Cornel West maybe in 2005 wasn't 100% on the same page as he is now, and he definitely had a little bit of evolution to go through, there is no doubt that much like Rashida and Ilhan, Cornel West himself did a lot of that work in really, opening up people to these ideas and popularizing and normalizing, even pushing back on Israel at all. He really used his platform and his, he's obviously a giant in the academic circles. People like my parents obviously greatly respect Cornel West, despite the fact that they may not be as consumed in lefty culture as I am, but they still really respect him. That's a lot of people love Cornel West, and the fact that he's used his platform and popularity to help spread awareness of BDS and to help explain why it's necessary, and not just BDS, but the crisis going on in general, the occupation. I think it does deserve a lot of credit, and obviously he's just been one of the most real ones when it comes to actually embodying these values of anti-imperialism, not just when it's convenient, but also when it's inconvenient, even when it'll make you a pariah.
It cost him his fucking job at Harvard, guys. I wanted to mention this too. When he was giving that unabashed speech, that's one of the, that is why Harvard got rid of him. That is why they would not tenure him, because they saw the way that he'd ratcheted up his speech on Israel and criticism of Israel, and they knew that if he got tenured, he was going to say whatever the fuck he wanted. I mean, he does say whatever the fuck you want, as he says all the time. I'm a free black man. Nobody will silence me.
And this is actually one of
shit wasn't going to.
And Cornel West is always, this isn't the only issue where he's done this. I remember he's also talked a lot about how during the Obama years, he was one of the few black voices that was really critical of Obama.
Took down Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I do think is a beautiful writer, and
it really cost him, honestly, at least at the time. I think since then some people have come around to his conclusions, but at the time he was kind of like ostracized from some certain communities. They wouldn't invite him back to speak. He kind of became like persona non grata, because it's like why are you dissing the first black president or whatever, refusing again to look deeper at the inconvenient reality about the imperialism that was being enabled by Barack Obama, among the many other things, which Cornel West stands in opposition to, as should those people that were calling him out. It should be universal opposition, regardless of who's in charge. But unfortunately, people don't always think that way. Anyway, the point is that Cornel West is always unafraid to, take some shit for speaking the truth. And ultimately, I think that's why he endures as such a voice of authority.
Yeah, and I don't think that there are a lot of voices like that, and so it is what he's been doing in this work that he's been doing is very important, because even with his sort of softer language, I do think that he is making the case and trying to make the point, albeit in a, with more equivocation than any one of us are comfortable at this stage. But we have the benefit of, seeing what's played out over the past, about, like over 50
and because
years.
he walks the walk, nobody's sus about it, right? Like everybody wants to talk about how like your like words are getting policed, like in that thing. Like Cornel West referred to people as yellow people. Like, I mean, like this is an antiquated term, and nobody like fucking.
He does that all the time. Still,
the heart is in the right place,
Yeah.
But you're just like,
nobody's like you can't question. Yeah,
you know
exactly.
What I mean?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
My girlfriend always brings that up because she's Filipino, and she's always like, oh, that does make me wince even when it comes from Cornel West. Like,
so when you hear it come out of Cornel West's mouth, you don't even question it. You're just like, yep.
Yeah. No, because he's, where he is, where he's coming from, and his his recognition of everyone's humanity and individuality, and his praise for that. And I think that it is very important to have voices like his as a black, a prophetic figure, this like sort of black prophetic tradition. To have him, he's sort of, he is a living sort of Martin Luther King of our time. I mean,
he is the philosophical figure. I mean, he's on the Mount Rushmore of radical leftist thinkers. And what's crazy to me is, as a secular person, I have absolutely no religious affiliation. I have never had that kind of impulse. A lot of the people that I think are leading the way in the most authentic, true quest for justice are people that do come from a theological background. I'm thinking of Cornel West, but I'm also thinking of Chris Hedges. I'm thinking of that kind of rich tradition has seemingly guided those people in the right direction, and they've kind of stood alone among their peers, rather, in that academic field.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll say is that, like, somebody that I was a massive fan, like my favorite rapper of all time is Lupe Fiasco. I do think, I mean, I did a video with Kwame from Raise Fist Media about Lupe Fiasco. He has a podcast now with Royce the 5'9", and they did this like police brutality episode of the podcast, and we broke it down, and I completely shit on Lupe's whole perspective, because his whole family is like, he comes from like, his dad's a cop, his brothers are cops and stuff, and he has this really
Chicago, right?
shitty take. He's from Chicago, and he has a really shitty take on policing, and it's unfortunate. So I want to lay that criticism down before I say anything positive about him. So definitely critical of of what he's doing, but he was influenced by Cornel West, and it was through his music that was the first sort of real introduction to even thinking about Israel Palestine, came for me through the words of Lupe Fiasco. And this is something that Cornel West was talking about in Democracy Matters. He talks about Chuck D and I forget who else he cited.
Dude, I was totally radicalized by hip hop. Like, I know it's so cliche to be a white boy that's radicalized by hip hop. To Pimp a Butterfly changed my life and my outlook on hip hop and also politics as a result. But it wasn't just To Pimp a Butterfly. It was when I got upset, like, the more you go back and you hear all of this stuff, you're like, I mean, it doesn't, I wouldn't say radicalized me completely, but it definitely opened my mind into a reality that I was never experiencing.
I'm telling you, I go back and I listen to music that I grew up on. And now that I'm listening to it now as a leftist, I'm listening to it and realizing like, oh, well, that's why I'm a socialist now. Like, that's why I'm radicalized now. Like, this is literally like in reggae in particular, they got one line in a reggae song where he's just like, if education is the key, then tell me why the bigger heads, they make it so expensive for we, like, why do they make it so expensive if education is the key? Why they, and just like there's so much revolutionary sort of language within the music that I've listened to. Tanya Stevens, another reggae artist, she says, providing no jobs and telling us stop the crime is like beating a child and telling them not to cry. And it's just that's a sort of like, and I realize now looking back, like, holy shit, Tupac, and listen to Pac and these folks, I'm like, I even I used to listen to Immortal Technique, and now I realize now like how you know, he's got some serious like socialist leftist commentary. But for Lupe Fiasco, in his song Words I Never Said, which is one of my favorite tracks by Lupe Fiasco, where he's just sort of letting a lot of things off his chest about, you know, things that he felt like he didn't speak out on when he should have. He talks about, you know, his thoughts on Obama, which he says, and he cites, you know, Cornel West as an influence for this. But he says, Limbaugh is a racist. Glenn Beck is a racist. Gaza Strip was getting bombed. Obama didn't say shit. That's why I ain't vote for him. Next one either. I'm a part of the problem. My problem is I'm peaceful and I believe in the people. And that was like what opened. I was like, wait, you know, Obama,
that's like a Killer Mike bar right there. That's
right.
Like, that's like, you know, why did Reagan and Obama both go after Gaddafi? Right. Like that's like, you know, that's a classic bar right there.
Absolutely. And so like it was like it's through, and in Cornel West, he talks about Baldwin's influence. You know, in that quote, he cites, you know, Baldwin's influence of jazz, you know, in influencing his, you know, his politics as well. And so I think that it's underplayed, but Cornel West did cite sort of hip hop and you know, black music as a part of the sort of revolutionary, you know, black thought that we've had. Speaking of black thought, literally from the Roots, you know, is another one that is,
100%.
exceptional.
I mean,
you know.
Yeah, I've always said that Kendrick Lamar is the Bob Dylan of our time, not just because he's probably the most prophetic writer in hip hop, in my view, but but when you combine that, the quest, the demand for, you know, social justice that was laced in his music, and then also the technical ability, you know what I mean? But yeah, 100%. We could ramble about hip hop for a long time. I'll get excited.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation, guys, and we're looking forward to next week's episode. I do have to get going myself, but it's been a great episode, and again, look forward to next week.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, peace out, guys.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining. Please like, subscribe, share, support the Vanguard and Radical Democracy Show on Patreon. For me on Coffee as well. That's preferred. You guys should set up a coffee if you don't already have a coffee. I definitely highly recommend setting up a coffee. Patreon takes out way too much. YouTube is absurd. It's ridiculous. Yeah. I'm telling y'all, you know, support however you can support. But I typically discourage people as much as possible from contributing on YouTube. I don't know if you've looked at the numbers, but it's actually,
we know it's fucking terrible.
It's 50%. Like YouTube is cutting 50% of the shit on super chats and 60%.
Well, don't tell people that. Come on.
I know, but we need them to know that these capitalists are.
All right.
Supporting these capitalists. And what you need to do is go support Zach and Gavin elsewhere so that they can actually, if you want, why are we feeding money into this? Literally, think about that. If YouTube is taking 50% of every single creator, that is like we are powering this machine for them, you know. So we gotta. If you're, really
regardless of how you participate in capitalism, you're fueling the machine, bro. Unfortunately.
Oh, absolutely. But we need to. We should try to skirt our dollars past anti-democratic institutions like YouTube and get them to more democratic places like the Vanguard and like the Radical Democracy Show, you know, particularly where we're building democratic workplaces, and not let them take such a chunk. I just, it blows my mind.
No, it's totally fucked up. No, 100%. I feel your frustration on that.
So by all means, please support
everybody. Tune in. Next Thursday, we'll be doing another episode. We'll be covering chapters 5 and 6. So everybody tune back in next Thursday. Subscribe to Vanguard, subscribe Radical Democracy Show. Please. Peace out, everybody.
Peace,
guys.
Thanks, y'all.